Good morning. I get the pleasure of the third day of RSA trying to wake you all up and talk about authentication technology. So I guess I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Derek Hansen, the VP for Standards and Alliances at Yubico. I work very, very closely with the FIDO Alliance on the development of the standards. What does that mean? How do we talk about them? But also with our partners as we start to figure out how do we build solutions for people to use these concepts in the real world. We've been working very closely around the challenges that we'll talk today, which are really the challenges of the passwords. What are wrong? I'm not going to sit here and tell you all the problems of passwords because my guess is you've probably heard it at least a couple dozen times this week. Between that and the phrase ChatGPT, I think that's just floating on the air everywhere here. So let's start talking about where we are with passkeys and why those are the newest tool in our toolbox for helping users authenticate. The important parts, gotta have the disclaimer up here. I'm going to assume you can all read that, and we will move forward. So about a year ago, about this time last year, my wife and I were moving into our new house. As we did that, we got a great new place, and my kids, not too long after that, started asking for some new puppies. We had a fence that does not look all that dissimilar from what is up on the screen. And I said, we can't get the puppies till I get the fence fixed. Well, eventually around Christmas time, I was worn down, I lost the battle, and my wife and the kids got the puppies. The reality of what I believe to be true about the fence not keeping things out or not keeping things in has proven to be abundantly true. Constantly trying to bring those dogs back on our side. That's the reality of what we are dealing with today in most of our MFA systems that are deployed. Whether you're talking about one-time passwords, you're talking about push apps, notifications, you are dealing with a solution that is a picket fence level of security. The reality of the problem is we are dealing with secrets. These are all Band-Aids, solutions that have been put on top of the problem of passwords that have tried to strengthen where we are. But they all rely on the fact that I have a secret and the server has a secret. And that problem means that our solutions aren't actually protecting our organizations. And we've seen that time and time again in breaches. I'm not going to name any of the breaches or publicly shame anyone, but the reality is we've all seen scenarios where MFA is now being breached at an increasing rate. One of the things that we have also been doing with our MFA conversations is we have been offering training programs. We're going to help the users figure out how to not be phished. We're going to hold them responsible if the website did a really good job of convincing them that they were authentic. Training solutions will not work. Now, if I asked you, and honestly, how many of you would tell me the truth in this one, have you clicked on a phishing link? I nearly got one, yeah. I mean, the reality of it is people are crafting messages that are well-timed. My daughter spent some time in a hospital, everything's fine, it's okay. But as soon as I got back from the hospital, somebody sent me a text message saying, hey, we are the financial aid department with the hospital. Would you like some help with your bill? I'm like, how did they even know? And it was so well-timed. I was about halfway down clicking this thing until I realized there's no way this is possible. So the concept of training our users away from falling for phishing is trying to take a human and put them responsible for detecting everything that's going wrong every time. And that is not a solution that's going to work. The other thing that's making this worse for all of us is the fact that the phishing attacks are becoming commoditized. You can go purchase a high-scale quality phishing attack today, complete with help desk and support for your phishing campaign, and it is in the sub $100 cost range on some of these cases. These are not difficult to launch, and that has been the challenge here is they are going after what we know is the weakest part of authentication. It's that it's phishable. When authentication relies on shared secrets, That means any secret I need to give to a server, I have to pass and trust everyone in the middle. So if I needed to tell you my secret, everyone else in this room is going to be able to know. And that is the problem. Whether it's a push app, one-time password, any of these things, they are all phishable and susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks. We've done a lot of work to band-aid them and to try and patch these holes, but the reality is they are phishable, just full stop. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to start building solutions for our users, for our employees, for the systems that are actually phishing resistant. There is hope. This is not like, hey, I'm just here with doom and gloom. There is hope. There are solutions out there. And we're going to talk about those solutions. We're going to talk about how to evaluate those solutions and where passkeys fit in that context of those solutions. The solutions that are out there today, tried and true methods that many of us probably bear the wounds from, smart cards in the old days in PKI. They were hard, they were heavy, and it was never really built for consumer-facing services or citizen services. It was designed for protecting infrastructure. Highly, highly used today because it does work, but it has its challenges in deployment and registration and life cycle, and we can talk about all those. Those challenges are what led us, working with Google and others, to try to build something that was built for web scale, that had the same phishing-resistant properties, and that's what you see in the FIDO Alliance. The FIDO Alliance was designed to solve the password problem. With the solutions that are in the FIDO Alliance, you have the security of a smart card where you have a private key on a device and a public key on the server. You have those benefits, but you also have the benefits of MFA. And so as we start talking through that is the foundation we need to have to talk about what passkeys are, because passkeys are a subset of the FIDO authentication solutions that are out there today. So if we're going to understand passkeys, we kind of have to understand a little bit about the use cases and the scenarios for FIDO. FIDO itself is a very complicated set of conversations because there's so many different things that we can do. It's very versatile, but versatility sometimes drives confusion for people. Simplest things that we can do with FIDO. Second factor authentication. We did a good, strong second factor authentication solution to remove phishing from the authentication event for the user, and that was called U2F. It's what we deployed at Yubico very heavily with Google to actually prevent phishing. The problem was it was still a Band-Aid on a password. It only works every place that second factor is enforced. And so if you had apps or other things that couldn't use that phishing-resistant second factor, you fell back to the password. You fell back to SMS OTP because the core problem is that password. And so building on top of that, we had passwordless authentication and passwordless multi-factor authentication. Think of passwordless authentication as your garage door opener. If you have it, you press the button, the door opens. Think about passwordless multi-factor authentication as your debit card. You put the card in, you get the PIN, and now the cash comes out. It's not good enough to have just stolen your card. I need both pieces of information. The last part of what's happening in the use cases is usernameless and passwordless authentication experiences. And those are experiences where you don't even have to type your username in. If you have your authenticator, we have the credential, you click on the box, we'll be able to identify what credentials you have available and move forward. That is building the best user experiences that we're able to build with authentication. The device knows you have keys, you didn't have to do anything but use your PIN or your biometric to actually unlock that. And we have made a huge leap in replacing passwords at that point in time. To understand as we go through the rest of this, there's three major components in a FIDO ecosystem that have to be clearly articulated so that you can make the decisions on what use case is right for you. The first one is the credential. Okay, there's a public-private key pair. That credential represents who you are. That is it is what signs a challenge sent from the server to validate you as a person. The second part is the authenticator. The authenticator is what holds the credential. This is an important distinction. The credentials live somewhere, and where they live sets the security properties of what you can trust and what you can rely on. So we'll be talking more about that. And then the last part is there has to be a browser and a client that would work with the backend server that will speak FIDO and WebAuthn. Earlier this week, there was a great talk by Christian Brand, and he covered a lot of the browser and client conversations about what Google has been doing to help implement these pieces. So let's get to passkeys. What about them? We've been hearing a lot in the press about passkeys lately. But really, what are they? Well, they're the answer to the question of how do we get rid of passwords faster? We've had the FIDO tools, we've been working on this for a while, but how do we actually get rid of them faster? One of the benefits of FIDO is that the credentials are bound to the device that they were registered on. Well, people thinking through passkeys said, well, could we simplify this in some of the recovery conversations if we change the properties of how a FIDO credential works? And passkeys were created. What passkeys are, they're leveraging two major ecosystem components that we've come to understand over the last several years. One is all of your browsers basically have a password manager built in, and a lot of us have actually gone and gotten third-party password managers. But users have become accustomed to saving their credentials in those browsers. The platforms have begun syncing those credentials everywhere your browser lives. So if you're in the Apple ecosystem, those passwords were available anywhere that your iCloud account was signed into. Same thing on the Chrome ecosystem. We have platform ecosystems where credentials have been being stored and being synced. The second part of that is the FIDO and WebAuthn specifications. When they took these two concepts and merged them together, we started looking at how we could deliver a passkey. The definition of a passkey is quite simply, it is a discoverable FIDO credential that is really, it's managed by that third party, by that platform or the third party passkey provider. The reason that the managed portion is important is if your passkey provider is a security key, your passkey is on that device, you know where it is. If your passkey provider is Apple or Google, you know that it's tied to that account and it's going to sync everywhere that that account syncs. So it's different properties, and how that key is managed is important to understand when you're looking at the system. Going a little bit farther into what are the types of passkeys. There's two major types: synchronized passkeys and hardware-bound passkeys or device-bound passkeys. In the synchronized passkeys, they're backed up and managed by the platform on your behalf. So if you get a new device, you sign in, those passkeys are available. It's a great experience when you're trying to just get back into your services. They're also built where you have, passkeys are also synchronized. Good night. I'm struggling here for a second. Outside of synchronized passkeys, we also have hardware-bound passkeys. Those hardware-bound passkeys have known security properties that have hardware attestation proofs, cryptographic proofs of where the keys live and where they reside. So it is important to understand that there's two major classes, because as we start moving forward, the two different classes have different security properties that you need to be able to analyze. Took that table and tried to make it visual. Here's the reality of the world that we're talking about here. In a synchronized passkey, that credential is copied onto all of the devices that user has access to. In a hardware-bound passkey, the device that is bound in hardware has to go to every device that you use. It's two different models. There's benefits in both models. The first model, where it's synchronized, is it's always available. I created a passkey on my phone, and now it's here on my laptop. And I have a secure authentication method that works for all my users everywhere. When I get to hardware-bound passkeys, I have different security properties. They're all resident. They're on the thing I control, kind of like your ATM card. So if you think about this, any of you that load your credit card information into your password manager so that you can shop online, that's like the first model. Any of you that would never load your password, let the browser save your password or your credit card information, that's the second model. You're going to type it every time. It's convenience versus security. And that is the conversation that we're having today. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to build a secure solution with passkeys. At the end of the day, security is only what you can prove. Beyond that, it's what you can hope for. And that's not something that any of us, I think, can rely on. To be able to prove something, you have to be able to examine it, you have to be able to look at the results of what was there, and you have to be able to show others what you did and why. A lot of us deal with security programs that have audit compliance requirements. Well, if you have an audit compliance requirement, the auditor is not going to take, well, this is better. They're going to want to know why. They're going to know how you did that. So you have to be able to prove your security. And the way that you're proving security when you're looking at your authentication event is you start asking questions. Where is this credential stored? Can I prove if it's hardware backed, if that is a requirement for me? Do I recognize this device? If a user gets a new device and signs in with a passkey and it's on that device, do you recognize that device that they're trying to access that data from? Maybe that matters to you, maybe it doesn't. But the question in that is, do I know that that was actually the user, or do I know somebody else got that user's account, got that actual device? There becomes more and more questions as you start to think through what happens when credentials live everywhere. Some of the other things to consider are about the account. One of the reasons I said earlier that U2F, that second factor authentication flow and passwords, was difficult is because at the account level, it still was a password that people signed in as. The lowest common denominator is what defines the security for that account. And if it's a password-based solution, that password is the lowest common denominator. And that is what sets the account security when you start thinking about what do they have access to. The other thing is, when you look at the account recovery conversations, especially with passkeys that are synchronized, if you start to leverage synchronized passkeys, you are now allowing the hardware vendors and the platform vendors to be responsible for the account recovery. You don't know that the account recovery mechanisms, any of the properties about that. So if a user is using a synchronized passkey on their iPhone, loses access to their iPhone account, gets a new phone and recovers it, that is going to look the same to you. It's going to look like they have the same credential. You're going to have no idea that happened. That may not matter for your organization. That may not matter for your application. But for those of you who it does, these are the questions that you have to start asking about passkeys as they're integrated into accounts. One of the other questions is, on the account side of things, does the platform allow only phishing-resistant authentication, allowing users to step up into a state that is phishing-resistant only? Google offers the Advanced Protection Program. It's a great example of where they will not sign you in unless you're doing FIDO authentication because they know that that's a phishing-resistant authentication method. The reason that's important is, again, back to that lowest common denominator. If I'm not in a state where I've opted into higher assurance, the users are going to be able to always fall back. And if the users can fall back, then so can the attackers, and that becomes the weak point. Google's Advanced Protection Program has been very successful for high-risk individuals, journalists, dissidents, writers in different countries, and it's been very important for them to be able to have that higher level of security as they've traveled. So these are some of the questions that you kind of get through. The problem is the list doesn't really end with what I've given you so far. There's more considerations. If you're using a hardware-backed solution, does the user have more than one authenticator? We all carry more than one set of car keys for our car, so we have something we have something to fall back to when we lost that other set, which in the case of my household is extremely important. But do we do the same, and are we thinking about credentials for users in the same manner? We always used to have one password. In a world where we're using FIDO and other credential types, we may have more than one primary credential that user can authenticate with. They should both work, just like both sets of car keys. Do you have a plan for that? Can you identify what are the right types of credentials, where this user is coming from? if that matters for you, because not every one of these questions is appropriate for every organization. And I think that is one of the key takeaways I want to make sure that we get to, is passkeys as a conversation is the right method to go forward with to start preventing or start getting rid of passwords. This how you go forward is a very personal choice based on your risk, what you need to do in your organization, and what you're willing to tolerate. So if you got to a spot where you've been listening to all these questions, your head's starting to spin, that's okay, because that's the reality of what happens as you're getting into the space. You start looking at a lot of considerations, and then one question begs the next question, that question begs the next question. The whole reason we're here today is to start working as a team, to start heading in a direction where we are going to make sure it's clear. Well, that is super dark. We're going to make sure it's clear that we are all fighting together to actually accomplish a goal, which is to get rid of the password. So let's talk about specific use cases. What type of passkey is right for who? And then we will wrap up here. So as we look at non-regulated consumer applications, so you're in a market, you're Spotify. I don't know why that's the one I chose to pick on. But you're building an application, you got a consumer service, you want to make sure that there is as little friction as possible in between you and your users. You want to make sure that you're building passkey solutions into your applications today that are facing your users, because it removes all the friction from how they've had to sign in. If you've got users clicking, I forgot my password or I forgot my username flows, those will start to go away as those passkeys are just resident on their device. The important part in this is to allow for users that are security conscious to enroll hardware-backed keys and give them that choice. The reality is we don't know all of our users' scenarios, so we want to make sure we remove friction but allow control where appropriate. Regulated consumer applications, so maybe banking, finance, any of the healthcare sectors. If you're allowed to use passkeys, they are infinitely better than what we are doing today. So much better than the SMS text codes I get for most of my banks. They are so much better than the email verification codes and links that I've gotten from the healthcare providers. At the end of the day, all of these things are extremely phishable, and they're just kind of a house of cards. Passkeys are the solution, and if your regulators allow it, get started with copyable passkeys, syncable passkeys, but make sure that you're enabling security keys for those users and those user groups where you need to prove to auditors what that story is for how your users are signing in. Right now, the regulations have not quite caught up with FIDO. And the reality is FIDO is moving faster than the auditors have begun to understand. So as we're looking through this, they're getting it, but they haven't updated policies. And so the easiest and clearest explanation is my key's here, I can prove it's here, and here's how I know that. And that is done through hardware attestation. The next use case, development teams. If you got developers in your organization that are building these apps, get them immediately into some hardware-based authentication methods for both authenticating to those systems as well as code signing. When you start talking about apps, these are users that are very sensitive, that actually impact your brand, because you compromising those keys leads to the compromise of the entire application. Enterprise applications. Security key solutions are the provable solution for enterprise applications. If you have audit requirements, compliance requirements, policies around the use of personal devices, security keys are that baseline that works for all the use cases out there. The challenge in that is always we are trying to replace what felt like a free solution in a password. We weren't counting the costs of password resets. We weren't counting the cost of the help desk. But the challenge is you're replacing a free solution in most people's minds. So these are new ways to think about things, but they get rid of the cost of that free solution, which is phishing. And that is our core problem. If you are looking at vendors and suppliers, one of the challenges I had when I was at one of the large commercial entities in my past is we wanted to try and enforce MFA on our suppliers, We did not want to buy MFA tokens for all of them. We did not want to be responsible for the delivery and the logistics of all of that pain. It was in retail, and we had 4 supplier identities for every 1 employee identity. That was just unmanageable, so that became the Wild West. FIDO gives you options and a tool to say, hey, here's what we require, bring your own. Passkeys might be the solution for you to make an immediate step up into that environment. So really what I want to have the key takeaways here is passwords are the problem that cannot be fixed. Okay, we've layered solutions on for years over passwords, but they have to be replaced. Will it be overnight? No, this will not be overnight. Will this be before I retire? I really hope so. But this is going to be a journey that we're all on, and those passwords are going to live in lots of places for many, many, many years to come. Because at the end of the day, they are a simpler solution to a problem. The solution, though, for password replacement is passkeys. It's just what is the right passkey for your users and your use case, because there is a lot of options in the passkey world. And the final thing I want to leave all of you with is what I truly believe is that security is only what you can prove. If you need to prove your security for yourself so you can sleep at night, for an auditor, for somebody else, you need to be able to collect the information that gives you those proofs, and to audit that information, you need the logs that help you do that. So I hope this was informative for you. I hope I did not put you to sleep on Wednesday morning after the first night of real parties last night. But if you have any questions, we'll be able to take them at the mics if you'd like. Or if you have anything where you want to reach out, please feel free to. Thank you.
One question related to this. How do you know what kind of authenticator is being used in terms of passkey? So do you know what's going on with the remote attestation of these authenticators?
So in the registration flows inside FIDO, one of the things that is included is an attestation statement. And that attestation statement will tell you where that credential was created. Attestation is the tool that you can use to prove the properties of the authenticator. The attestation will carry in it a reference back to FIDO metadata that you can go back to the FIDO Alliance and look up their certification policies around, or not their certification, the product's certification status. And depending on the level that they're at, you're going to have certain properties that you know about that. FIDO certification level 2 and above tells you that that credential is stored in hardware so that you can then determine what to do with it. Levels 1 and below are interoperable, they could be software, they could be synced. So it depends on what you're trying to prove as to where that information is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. All right. Well, if that's it, I hope you guys have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.